abusing their power.
Right.
You know, I would get mostly African American officers that run the IA division and run an investigation every 3 to 5 years of an officer's term to determine whether or not that person should still be in a position of power. What I would do is I would run a background investigation, and then what I would also do is pretend that 3 men committed a crime. 2 of them are very likely the suspects. I would make one of them a Hispanic and the other a black. And I would have a white officer be the officer that oversees that investigation and see which one he chooses. And then after he chooses the black man, I would then submit him to go through a psych evaluation to see maybe, just maybe, because of everything he's dealt with in the force, maybe he's decided he's now racist against blacks, and he may not even realize it yet.
Right. And that's a good point you bring up, because for those of you guys that don't know, I used to be a paramedic, and what's crazy about like experiencing trauma like that is that, heck, even when I was a medic, bro, like I used to judge people left and right. Like,
Yeah.
I'm not even gonna lie, because like when I didn't judge someone,
Yeah.
I was not as safe as I could have been.
Yeah.
And for an instance, I had a call where I responded to a guy's house and he was like on drugs or whatever, and like I didn't judge him at all. But he ended up choking me out. You know what I mean? He choked me out, and I had police officers there that helped me, right, to get out of the situation. But moving forward, every time I ran into this particular race, I always kept that in the back of my head, like, hey, he could possibly lash out, like, you know what I mean? So I started to develop like patterns and trends because of my experience.
Yeah.
And I think sometimes when you're like in that world where you're always experiencing something consistently, you know what I mean? Like, it's hard not to judge. It's hard not to like raise suspicion against a certain race if that's what you're running into all the time. You know what I mean? And I think we as black people, that's where we could address the situation by telling our youngsters, by teaching the young people, like, you know, living a life of crime is only going to lend to them thinking this way about us.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Or doing things that are like, you know, criminal activity, or living a lifestyle that kind of lends to, you know, judgment.
Yeah.
You know, that's what produces itself. That's the fruit of it.
Yeah.
So it's such a it's like so many different sides of the conversation, but I've definitely been guilty of judging, and I can't even sit here and say that I haven't. Like, I definitely understand in some instances where the cops are coming from, as far as using like their past history to make an assumption.
Yeah.
And sometimes that assumption is dead wrong.
Yeah.
But it's like, how do you deal with that? I mean, I think for me personally, I've always said, being an EMS, being in law enforcement, anything that puts like that kind of strain on your mental, I really feel like it should be a limited term of service. Like, you should not be in that job for no 30 plus years, 40 some years. Like, it's just too depressing.
Yeah.
There's just too much that goes on, like, for any human being to be able to process all that and not be changed or not be affected. You know what I mean? Like, I feel like that has to be addressed, because some of these dudes have seen so much in one lifetime that you shouldn't see. And they've probably been, like, their lives have probably been put on the line, like, way more than is necessary.
Yeah.
So getting them out of there and being like, all right, man, thank you for your service, you're done.
Yeah. Kind of like in the military. It's like, okay, you've seen battle, you know, you lost a thumb or a leg, like, you're done.
Right.
You know, it's like, okay, at what point do we make the decision that an officer has seen too much? Because officers don't get blown up every day. So it's not like we can say, okay, you lost a leg, so, you know, thank you for your service, you're done.
Right.
You know, we need to start having these psych evaluations for these cops. Like I said, every 3 to 5 years, making sure, like, all right, hey, you know, this is what you've seen. These are all the cases we've examined that you've been a part of. And ultimately, based off your psych eval, this is the decision we've made. Thank you for your service. Have a nice life. You know, enjoy your pension.
True.
You know, that's it.
Another thing, man, is like, they always had like these debriefings after like a call. Like, say you saw something traumatic, or maybe you were your life was put on the line or at risk, there was always some kind of debriefing for you to go to. It was always available, but not necessarily required for you to go and accept. I think that has to change.
Yeah, it needs to be required.
It needs to be required off the bat. And then the second thing is, like, not only should it be required, but I think it's taken as a joke. You know what I mean? Like, we don't take it. I know I didn't take it necessarily that serious. Like, and I also took it as like a sign of weakness. You know what I mean? I feel like some cops feel like if they reach out for help, or because the majority of medics that I knew, they weren't necessarily publicly reaching out for help like that.
Right.
I don't even know what they did to deal with what they were going through. So I can imagine being an officer, it might be the same thing where it's not a popular thing to go out and seek help, and it's probably looked down upon. Maybe you're not man enough or whatever, but to be honest, I really feel like those topics need to be addressed, because it could have prevented this situation from ever happening. Period.
For sure.
Seriously.
I mean, I know that a lot of people were kind of weirded out that George was hanging out outside of the store after handing a fake 20. I mean, but let's be real, guys. Like, we're still in COVID-19 quarantine-ish. Some states are opening up more than others, but he probably didn't have nothing to do that day. Probably just chilling. Maybe he was meeting a friend. Like, we don't know what was going on in that man's mind. Like,
and to me, like,
why is that even looked down upon? Why did the officer feel the need to tackle him and do anything that he did?
Right.
That's where I'm confused as a white man, because I'm just like, he was chilling. He was just hanging out outside the store.
Right.
I've gone to the bank myself as a white man, pulled out maybe $100 in 420s, right?
Right.
Gone to the store, and one of those 20s comes up as a counterfeit.
Right.
Why am I not being pinned to the ground?
My thing is, again, these guys have been conditioned for so long,
right,
that these officers that have already experienced stuff, I think it's an automatic trigger. It's an automatic response to just tackle somebody, to just go after him, go for the jugular, because maybe you lost the fight earlier in your career.
Right.
Maybe somebody put you at risk, or maybe you caught yourself in a bad situation because you didn't go from 0 to 100 real quick. Maybe you were too lenient and passive. You know what I mean? It's one of those gray areas being a police officer, because you start doing that kind of stuff, and who's to say that you even realize you're doing it? Right. You know what I mean? And that's where it's like, a lot of times I think these cops don't even realize they're doing it. Like, sometimes I think it just becomes second nature to them.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Not saying that it's right. It's definitely not right. But maybe that's why they're doing it.
Yeah.
It's craziness.
So, I mean, it just seems to come full circle. It comes back to the idea of making what you were talking about after responding to a call an absolute requirement, instead of just a thing that's available for officers. And then also, like I was saying, every 3 to 5 years, having that psych evaluation and determining whether that officer is still fit for duty. I think would be the two steps that I would take personally if I was a police chief or a captain of a specific precinct, especially of that precinct where that officer did that. But this needs to be a nationwide, if not global-wide, transition period where these precincts and these officers start to make drastic changes in their departments.
Right. But until then, man, I think all we can do right now is still believe in faith. I can't stress it enough. I am a man of the word, and I really believe that God literally depends on our faith to activate certain things, and you ain't gonna see it happen until you believe it that it's already done.
Yeah.
And you just have to believe it in your heart and know that God is going to lead us out of this place, because that's what his word says. That's what he promises. That's the kind of God we serve. You know what I mean? And to act like this will never get fixed is definitely not something I think we should be doing as a people.
No.
Don't forget about God. That's all I'm saying. It all starts and ends with God. Because we want to change people's hearts. Come on, we're talking about the hearts of men.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Can no man change the heart of a man except for God, except Jesus Christ himself. You know what I mean? And to not bring him to the forefront of this conversation and make him the center of it.
Yeah.
The loudest voice in all of it. It doesn't make any sense to me to think that we're going to change anything. I feel like a lot of people are offering solutions, But if God ain't in it, the system will break again.
Well, it's
and
like the
again
Bible
and again.
says, you know, we can't rely on our own understanding, our own thoughts as men, because we're so fleshly. We need to rely on every word out of the mouth of God,
Bro.
and that is it.
It's gonna be the only thing that brings us true unity.
Yeah.
We're talking about true peace. It's gonna be the only thing that brings that kind of peace. Like no other peace on this earth can
It's not
even come
sufficient.
close. Yeah, it doesn't even come close, man. So for me, Jesus has to be something that comes out of this conversation, because if it doesn't, oh, well, what are we doing?
Yeah.
There's too many opinions in the world to satisfy.
Amen.
You know
I
what
agree.
I mean? Like, there's too many people that have different approaches to like how this should be done and why this needs to happen, and I'm hurt and this is how I feel and this is how I feel. Like, the only person that can take their feelings out of it
Yeah.
and bring some good about it is Jesus. So, yeah, I think